Hi, I'm sitting here with Aubrey Ballou, and I just figured it might be nice to record some of these conversations that he and I have. There's a lot of wisdom to pull from this, and just wanted to talk about some things that are probably of interest to those who are interested in preaching the truth and those who are wanting to do right, and hopefully these things will be useful.
And I appreciate the chance, Steve. This is something that I'm not sure that I can contribute much of value, but I can give you a lot of years, and we can think about some things that have happened through the years. And I hope that we might be able to share some of our experiences and maybe some of our perspectives on things. And that, if that's going to be worth anything to folks, then it's going to be okay for me. And I don't mind spending the time. I'm just a big talker anyway, and I just want to be able to say some things that will be helpful. And obviously we planned this ahead of time, and we're trying to think about some things that would be helpful. And I'll tell you, one of my big concerns is the way that people look at preaching. And I thought maybe the first time we set out to do this, I'd give you some of my ideas about that, thought of what it means to preach. And I can say from my own experience that the idea of preaching really is not the kind of an idea that most folks have it to be. And I mean, even those who preach really don't have an idea about what true preaching is. And I don't say that as one who's an authority on it, but I do know that it's not a job. People kind of think of preaching, I'll take up preaching when I get older, as though that's something that you can choose, just like you might choose to be a doctor, or you might choose to decide that you want to be an outdoors person and take a course in that regard. Preaching to me is a mission. And it's the kind of a thing that I think people have to go into from the heart with the idea that that's what God would want me to do, to serve Him. And if you do it that way, and you can think from that perspective, then you won't be cluttered up by how much you're going to make. You won't be cluttered up by what people think about you or anything. You just be trying to do what you know God wants you to do. And just from my own experience, that when I set out to live my life, I didn't think about preaching. I was profited by having a family that raised me to be a Christian. And they wanted me to serve God, and they taught me that's what you ought to do. And my first effort at preaching really was kind of an accident. I found myself actually there's some other, there's a backstory here that I'm not sharing with you. But I wound up in the spring one year with no schooling, or with no school in front of me to take, and opportunities here. I took me a job. I became an accountant at a recap tire place. And while I was there, one of my friends came to me and said, you know, there's a place up in Illinois that I decided to go up and preach this fall. And it was May, I think, whenever he made this proposal for me. And I can't get there till September. Would you go up in my place? And I didn't have anything to do. I wasn't married. So I said, yes, I'll go up in your place. The thing about it was, when I got up there, they didn't know that I was supposed to be up there. And so I had taken my suitcase and come up there to try to fill in and do the best I could. What I had was a sermon outline book and my Bible, and just a kind of a will to try to do what God wants me to do. And when I got up there, we had to go through the process. They finally had to validate me and say, well, we'll accept you for this time. So we did, and I worked all summer. I did the best I could at preaching, without any idea that I was going to be a preacher. Actually, my ambition when I grew up was I was going to be a farmer. And I courted my wife, who wanted to be a farmer's wife. And so we got married later on that summer. But in the process of doing that, of course, I didn't have any notion that what I would wind up doing would be a preacher. But I filled in that summer. And what happened really was, at the end of the summer, when my brother came up to take the job or to begin to work there, he didn't like the house they had for him, so he just turned around and went back and left them without a preacher. And they asked me if I'd stay on, and I stayed on for a couple of years. And I stayed on really with the understanding that whenever they got a preacher, that I'd step down. In fact, I got me a job at a foundry and began to work as a regular person. And then after 2 years, they finally got a preacher. And so I settled down. By that time I was married, and I had me a child. And I settled down to work at my foundry and do those kind of things. And just a month later, one of the brethren from Middle Illinois came and asked me if I'd come up there and preach. Well, I said I would. So I quit my job. They promised me to get me a job up there, and they didn't do that. But I went up there and started preaching. And I didn't think I was a preacher. I was just filling in for them until they got somebody else. And when I got up there, then I found out that they wanted different things from a preacher than I thought a preacher ought to be doing. They wanted me to join the Ministerial Association. They wanted me to join the Sportsman's Club and get all involved in things like that. And I was having to work 40 hours a week and do my preparation for my teaching responsibilities, and I didn't have time for that, and I didn't even want to do that. So I fell out with a fellow who had asked me to come. I didn't last very long there. And I wound up, after about 5 or 6 months, I came back home to Mississippi, got me a job at Penny's, and decided I was through preaching. I hadn't been here very long till they asked me in a little place called Aberdeen to come over there and preach. And so I wound up doing that. I preached there, again, just hoping to be helpful to the work and not necessarily thinking I was a preacher. And I worked there for 2 years, and the church grew, and they asked me if I'd move over there. So they got me a job over there, and I began to work from Aberdeen and preach there. And after another year, they decided they would want me to go full time, so I did that. At that point, I decided I was going to be a preacher. And I guess what I'm saying all this for, Steve, is just to say that really, if you have the desire to serve God, then it'll take care of itself. You don't really have to worry about what you choose to do. Just take opportunity to serve God. Money was never an issue with me. In fact, I probably was blessed by the fact folks didn't pay me very much in the beginning. But I never asked for much, and I tell you preachers today, don't ask for money. You can make it like Paul did. Sometimes he made tents, and sometimes he was supported by the brethren. It's always up to them. It wasn't up to him. And he wasn't always telling me I've got to have so much to come, which I hear so many times today. And I don't care how we think that things have changed. They haven't changed that much. And the reality is you can get by on a whole lot less than you think you can. What I'm trying to say is preaching is the thing, the work that's to be done. It's not the idea of what are you going to get supported by it or whatever. If you can do the work, do the work. And if people help you, then that's great. Sometimes I see these preachers that are 20, 22, 23 years old coming in and say, I've got to have $3,000 a month or I'm not going to be preaching for you. I'm wondering how God looks at that. I'm wondering how that measures up to what Paul had in his life in terms of what he did. I don't think he ever reached the point. And certainly we don't have any record of it where he told the church, you got to help me this much or I won't preach. And it just seems to me like we've got a handle on things in the wrong way. And that's one thing I'd like to talk to young folks about to make you understand. If you've got the desire to preach, make it because you want to serve God. Make it because you understand that what God has in mind for you is that you do this work. And you do it no matter what brethren think about you. You do it no matter how much it costs you. You do it no matter what it calls upon you to do in terms of taking stands for things. You just do what God wants you to do. And doing that over the years has been good for me. I hope it's been good for the Lord. And I believe that you and I can work together in respect to trying to join in doing kingdom work in the way that God wants it to be done. I'm afraid that we have too much stress on the idea of material things and living in material ways. Not enough about trying to serve God and put that first in all that we do. That may be enough to talk about today. I don't know.
One question I kind of had, do you remember any kind of advice from brethren that maybe helped you out early on?
Most of what I got was negative.
Yeah.
I think I was plowing new ground most of the time. And when I was a kid, and I refer to myself, you folks may not know it, but my first full-time work came when I was 18. And I was as green as grass and didn't know what I was doing. And I had enough sense to realize I needed a lot of help. But the kind of help I was getting was, cool it. Don't be so aggressive and do things. And that's just not my nature. If I believed something was right to do, I just went ahead and tried to do it. Sometimes I got slapped down over it. But what I just said to you is not what I heard other folks say. This is what I decided myself and the way it worked out for me. So I would say, and again, I'm not an authority. I'm just saying this is what, to me, is the picture I have of myself and God. That God wants me to be his servant without any complaints, without any conditions, without deciding that I'll do it if certain things happen, but just to go ahead and do it. I guess maybe if we want advice, I'd just say, do what you understand to do as far as you can understand it, and then as you get more understanding, do it better. I would guarantee you, I did a lot of things that were amiss. I didn't know what to do. But I think my salvation was that I wanted to do the thing God wanted me to. And I kept on studying what he gave me. And I kept on looking at what other folks were doing and what I was doing, and trying to modify my behavior in the right ways. And if you keep that in your sights and you understand that's where you're going, then you can make up for a lot of mistakes. And you know, one of the things about where I am now, many folks still alive to tell you what I did back then. So you just have to go on my word for this. But those are the kind of things that, to my mind at least, were uppermost in my mind. I tell, when I had a chance to talk to a lot of young fellows who want to preach, and I do all I can to discourage them, because it seems to me like we've got a lot of folks who have glib tongues and can talk a lot. But we don't have many with good hearts who really want to do the right thing regardless. And I just say, go through these things. I like to see folks have to struggle to be in a position where they could preach, because that proves whether or not they're willing to preach and they want to preach, and whether they do the things that need to be a preacher. So that at least would be my advice in terms of how to, not necessarily what others want to hear. And there are a lot of young fellows out there I think would be better off doing something else. And I think the church would be better off if they were, because they're not serving God. But what bothers me today is I see a lot of young men who know the truth and who might even agree on the things that are troubling the church today, but they don't mention them. They don't talk about these things from the pulpit. They don't discuss issues. They don't talk about what the church is facing. And, you know, there's a market for that. There are people who want to hear that kind of preaching. And you can preach the truth every day. And you can go to hell in the church you're preaching with and go to hell, because they don't hear the things they need to hear. And so one of my questions is, why, if you're going to preach, why would you do anything but what God tells you to? Why would you want to be silent? Why would you want to not do the things that would identify and distinguish the church from other institutions? And yet I'm seeing that all over the place, that we've got men who can really talk a good fight, who have a lot of ability in terms of what they are able to say, but don't say the right things, and don't put the right emphasis on things. And if I've been able to do anything through the years, I've tried to keep in view that this is what God wants for the church, and this is what I need to do and to be to help bring that about. And, you know, what little I can do, what little you can do, and we all ought to understand none of us are indispensable. We just do what we can do. And then I think the overall effect is what God wants to accomplish. And sometimes it doesn't turn out well. Sometimes you do your best to preach the truth and encourage folks, and it might blow up the church. I've seen that happen in my lifetime. But you've got to make sure you're on the right track and doing the right things. And if there is division on those grounds, it's the kind of division God wants. And I'm not saying that to encourage anybody to divide. I'm just saying that teach the truth. Be a faithful preacher. Try to measure up to that. And that's what God wants from you, and he'll take care of the rest of it. And I just don't know how else to say that.
I don't know if this would be different specifically, but would you have any advice for brethren on treating younger preachers, how they deal with younger preachers?
Yeah, don't baby them.
Don't baby them.
You know, it's good, and I thrill to the idea that we got young men who want to get into the Word, but they got to be tough. And we pamper them. And, you know, I never was pampered. In fact, you asked me for what advice I got. Most of the time, folks were telling me not to do what I was doing, and that you're going to mess up things, you're going to hurt people. I learned that before I ever became a parent, we got folks who thought they knew all about parenting, and they would tell me how to be a parent. And I'd preach them on what the Bible said about fathers and mothers and things like that, and they'd say, just wait till you become one. Well, I hadn't changed my preaching in 60 years on those things. And I became one, and I tried to apply what I had learned from the Bible to my parenting. And I just say, listen to people, you know, listen to old folks like me, but you do what you've got to do. You do anything because I said it or because anybody else said it. But you get down to cases with the Bible, try to study what God wants, and be a man about it. Understand, you got to answer for what you do and what you teach, and just go ahead and do it. And then if you make mistakes, then you can correct them. And that's what God has done for us. He's given us a eraser. He takes things away that are bad if we admit to them and try to do right. And I've been full of that through my life, both ways. And that's the way I think you ought to look at that.
We're going to try to do conversations like this off and on as time goes on. If you have anything that you would like for us to talk about, or anything that you're interested to hear from us on, be sure and let us know, and appreciate you watching.